Hello and welcome to the Political Brief. I'm Molly Hall. It's good to have you with us. Coming up in this edition, it's full steam ahead for France's railway reforms. The government revamp of the national train service passes its first legislative hurdle. And a controversial immigration bill sows seeds of dissent in the president's ruling party. Plus, Emmanuel Macron warns divisions between democracy and authoritarianism in Europe are like a civil war. Well, we start with the standoff that continues between rail workers and the French government. Strikes halted train services for the 9th day this month. This as protests over the shakeup of the state-owned railway company are expected to last until June. But the reform bill has now passed its first hurdle, and President Macron says there's no turning back.
Le scrutin est ouvert.
It's full steam ahead for France's railway reforms as the government's plan to revamp the national train service passed its first legislative hurdle.
I think you've seen that the National Assembly has overwhelmingly voted in favour of this bill for a new railway deal. This is obviously an important moment and a decisive step towards this reform. The President once again said on Sunday that this reform is essential to renew our railway system, to ensure a better service for everyone in France, and to strengthen the SNCF, while undertaking an unprecedented investment programme.
A vote in favour despite fierce opposition from the left, from unions and railway workers themselves. The SNCF employs over 150,000 people, a massive workforce that's historically fought tooth and nail to defend their status. Railway workers have job security for life, reduced ticket prices for them and their families, and a retirement scheme that some see as overly advantageous. While Macron has ensured that existing employees would not be stripped of any rights, new recruits would not be granted this special status. The reform would also open regional railway contracts to bids from the private sector as early as 2019 in preparation for European-wide competition in the industry. The government hopes this should lower ticket prices and improve overall quality of service. The bill now heads to the Senate, but in the meantime, a rolling strike meant to increase pressure on the government to back down will continue.
This week, the French Parliament has been debating a new immigration bill. The legislation has sparked rumblings of revolt within President Macron's party, this with several MPs openly challenging his plans.
As France's parliament starts debating tough new immigration policies, Emmanuel Macron is facing a backlash from many within his own party. It's one of the most divisive issues for members of La République En Marche.
We aren't sheep blindly following. We are here to develop the text of the law. It's the role of the lawmaker to advance text and to vote on them. I'm taking on this role.
Emmanuel Macron's program prioritized integration through learning French. This law is about distrust of migrants, not allowing them the opportunity to integrate.
The new bill accelerates the expulsion of people who don't qualify for asylum and will reduce France's consideration period for an asylum application to a maximum of 6 months, down from 11 months. While the time people can be placed in a government detention centre would be increased from 45 days to 90 days. The Minister of the Interior says he's optimistic that the law will be voted in.
I have total confidence in the majority, who I believe will hold themselves accountable.
However, around 20 lawmakers from Macron's La République En Marche party are expected to abstain from the vote.
Well, France has received a record 100,000 asylum applications last year. That's bucking the general trend in Europe, where the number of asylum seekers halved between 2016 and 2017. Now, a shortage of accommodation means many wind up on the streets, and some French citizens who are helping refugees and migrants find themselves on the wrong side of the law.
Assisting the illegal entry, circulation or presence of foreigners in France is punishable by 5 years in prison and a €30,000 fine. Human rights groups call it being guilty of solidarity. The text applies to those who help undocumented migrants but not asylum seekers. As long as they've officially requested asylum, their presence in France is legal. In 2012, under François Hollande, the law was slightly softened. Assisting an undocumented migrant is now legal under certain conditions. It may only be done to preserve the person's dignity or physical well-being, and it also has to be done selflessly, without direct or indirect compensation. In other words, accommodation or food must be offered free of charge. While it is perfectly legal to assist a person in distress, facilitating the entry or circulation of illegal immigrants is still punishable by law. For example, if migrants are crossing a dangerous road, it is legal to offer them help or transportation. But taking them to a train station to facilitate their journey is forbidden, a subtle difference that's left to the judge's discretion.
Well, immigration is a major issue in France and in Europe because of the ongoing refugee crisis. That, of course, sparked in large part by the ongoing Syrian civil war. Well, last Saturday, France, the United States, and the UK launched missile strikes in Damascus, this in response to an alleged chemical attack in the town of Douma, which killed at least 40 people. Well, France's involvement in the strikes has been criticized by many. Nadia Massey has more.
On both extremes of the political spectrum, condemnation for France's role in the Syria strikes.
The risk of global war always begins with incidents that initially seem minor. I'm very sad and worried. I'm counting on Russia's composure to make sure this ends here.
Those words from the far-left leader meant he sounded not unlike his rivals on the far right. National Front leader Marine Le Pen took to Twitter declaring, "These strikes on Syria take us down an unpredictable path with potentially dramatic consequences. Once again, France has lost an opportunity to act as an independent power on the world stage." And while the condemnation wasn't so clear-cut from the centre-right, there was a note of caution there too.
Trump and Macron want to show their strengths and flex their muscles. We shouldn't play around when world peace is at stake.
The socialists, though, backed the airstrikes, but argued a political solution via the UN should be France's top priority.
The French president himself recognized that the airstrikes didn't necessarily resolve anything. But Macron vigorously defended the joint operation while addressing the European Parliament.
On numerous occasions, several members of the international community have taken steps to lessen the power of the UN and the OPCW by deconstructing the OPCW's allocation mechanism and then by opposing all resolutions allowing further measures to be taken. These same members who are outraged by the images that we've seen of children and women killed by chlorine attacks. Do we remain seated? Do we defend rights by saying rights are for us, principles are for us, but reality is for others? No. No.
Emmanuel Macron speaking there in Strasbourg. Now, this was his first time addressing the EU Parliament. The president laid out his vision for the future of the bloc and warned that divisions between democracy and authoritarianism in Europe were becoming like a civil war.
A vision of a reformed, deeply integrated Europe engaged with its own citizens and a redoubt against the dangers of nationalism and isolation. That was the vision that French President Emmanuel Macron laid out to European MPs in his first ever address to the EU Parliament in Strasbourg.
I want to belong to a generation that defends European sovereignty, because we fought to have it, because there's a reason for it, and because it is the condition that will allow generations to come to decide their future for themselves. And I will not give in to any fascination with authoritarian sovereignty.
Macron also outlined proposals for future EU projects, including the creation of a common Eurozone budget and finance minister, and financial aid for local authorities who welcome in and integrate refugees. Not everyone was so receptive to his ideas, though, particularly on the right wing.
True democracy does not mean dividing us into good and bad Europeans.
The vision of a European Union may be the right vision for France, but the ECR group feels it is not the right vision for all member states.
The EU's seen much stress on its foundations in recent months, particularly with the United Kingdom gearing up to leave the bloc. Macron's speech, though, seemed designed to inject new life, putting the political union back at the heart of French policy.
Well, part of Emmanuel Macron's plans to strengthen the EU involves town hall meetings. European citizens will be asked to express themselves on major issues that concern them. Emerald Maxwell explains.
Rising Euroscepticism and anti-European feeling pose a serious threat to the future of the European Union. French President Emmanuel Macron knows this, and since his election campaign has been pushing the idea of town hall meetings. The aim is to rebuild a link between the EU and its citizens and try to better understand what they expect from European policies by gathering their impressions and recommendations. The idea has come a long way, so what's the plan? It's no longer a series of conferences or courses, or even a new treaty drafted by European citizens. Instead, from April to October 2018, debates will take place across France and in all the EU's member states. There'll be discussions on the ground, but also online consultations. European citizens will be asked to express themselves on the major issues that concern them, including employment and future investments, food security and environmental issues, defence and the fight against terrorism, Europe's place in the world, innovation and digital transformation, and European citizenship. Their contributions will be presented at the Council of the EU in December 2018, before voters go to the polls for European elections in May 2019.
Well, that's it for this week on The Political Brief. We'll leave you now with images of Emmanuel Macron, who welcomed the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau this week to Paris. The two leaders stressing their common vision and the strength of their personal friendship.